This is a real-time strategy game called Warcraft 2. You might recognize it from all the other times I've included it in videos. I'm rather fond of it, and it has sat in my top 5 most played and top rated DOS games of all time since its release in 1995. You navigate the mouse cursor and click on a unit to select it. The unit makes a noise to acknowledge this as an information pane about the unit appears. You can click on buttons for an action or use the contextually sensitive mouse cursor to right-click on things in order for the unit to respond. You have a limited amount of view, and the things you're not currently looking at with your units are obscured by the fog of war. This is a real-time strategy game called Age of Empires 4 from 2021. It has the exact same basic control scheme, but 26 years later. Now, while there are all kinds of differences that have slowly crept into the genre, like unit queuing and grouping and hotkeys and the ability to zoom in and out, the design decision, refined but not created outright by Blizzard, was so universally accepted that it has become the standard ever since. Whether it's right-click to move, or a big end-turn button, or something less obvious like mouse over tooltips, there are some design choices that were so right, so perfect, that they've never been improved upon. And the era that this happened in? That's right, the era of DOS gaming, through to early Windows titles. Some might look back on such simple improvements with derision, claiming that it wasn't that hard to come up with the idea in the first place. But they're speaking with the benefit of historical hindsight. It's one thing to modify and alter something that's already there, it's another entirely to pull the concept out of the ether with no previous point of reference. Thing is, most of these innovators weren't really doing that, but they were combining existing ideas in a way that hadn't been done before, which is almost as tricky. In my initial example, for all their innovation, Blizzard already had 4 clear points of reference to build upon. Dune 2 by Westwood Studios, Herzog's 5 by Technosoft, their own Lost Vikings game, and Lemmings. They also experienced over a decade's worth of innovation in how computers used the mouse in a graphical user environment. So the cursor operation wasn't truly innovative. The original Warcraft largely appeared to be a Warhammer knockoff fantasy reskin of Dune 2, released to capitalize on the fact that nobody had cloned it and profited off this new RTS genre. But even that sported innovations that the previous game didn't. The Dead Mines, the 4th level of both the human and orc campaign, turns the game completely on its head. It's the first traditional RTS level set indoors, that I'm aware of, but even that was heavily influenced by the previous porting work of The Lord of the Rings to the Amiga. It also provides the player with a limited number of troops, which they have to conserve through tactical movement and engagement, essentially creating the real-time tactics genre in one level, and predating Shadow of the Horned Rat by a year. This base allowed them to add innovations to the genre in their sequel, like adapting Empire's Fog of War and adding right-click to move, which to my knowledge was a true innovation and hadn't appeared previously, but someone in the comments section can undoubtedly correct me about that. They didn't invent the likes of unit queuing or 3D terrain, and honestly were notorious for taking other people's ideas and polishing them up to an even higher standard. But every so often, they'd release something that changed the game. Diablo in 1997 pretty much invented what we call the action RPG today. Isometric, mouse-driven, 2 bars on either side for mana and health, and like all good design ideas, it spawned thousands of imitators, each one trying to differentiate itself in some way from the original design. And it's those smaller design decisions that many players begin to take issue with. Sure, some of them were minor improvements to the genre, like the idea of adding a difficulty setting or auto-save function, or the ability to play specific levels on a whim if you've already completed them in the campaign. These generally benefited the player. Game design, though, is like a Jenga tower, and if you start adding on top of it or messing with core parts of it, there's the risk that these carefully stacked components will completely collapse thanks to your meddling. Let's take the example of quest markers in RPG games. Generally speaking, they were positively received when they rose to prominence in the early to mid-2000s. No longer were you bumbling around in the dark, following cryptic messages or being frustrated by labyrinthine levels. That's a good thing, right? Sort of, because there's a significant trade-off. If you have a giant arrow pointing out where you need to go at all times, it absolutely kills the immersion, and you've turned a world into a glorified theme park. Instead of experiencing the flavor text and atmosphere and level design, players can jump from one key point to the next, eyes firmly fixed on their destination and choosing to ignore everything else. Earlier game designers knew not to go overboard, that less was more, and including things for the sake of it were often detrimental to the experience. They traded experience for convenience, the delayed gratification for the culture of immediacy, initially because it was fun, but gradually in the hope that being immediate would appeal to more people and make more money. And it did. When games started being designed to make more money instead of being as fun as possible, other design decisions started to creep in that were influenced by capitalistic greed, rather than offering a better experience for the player. These paywalls are absent from the earlier games, but the slow and inexorable descent into making as many modern games as possible, glorified slot machines, at the expense of the player, continues to this day. Sure, there are some great new design decisions every so often, but most of what constitutes what modern gaming considers good design has been carved in stone, and true innovations are nowhere near as prevalent as in the heyday of gaming, when everything was more open and ready to be discovered. And nowhere are these design foibles and successes so prevalent than in the magnificent back catalogue that is DOS gaming.